Good evening and welcome. Tonight we gather for preserving your legacy. Personal, necessary, and those of our ancestors and responsible to our descendants. Black history is not something that only lives in textbooks, museums, or archives. It lives in our families. It lives in our homes, our churches, our businesses, our victories, and yes, even our struggles. Too often, when those stories aren't preserved by us, they are lost, or worse, told by someone else without context, care, or truth. That's why tonight matters. Preserving your legacy is about more than remembering the past. It's about protecting the truth, honoring resilience, and ensuring that future generations know exactly who they come from and where they came from, what it took to get here. It's about making sure our elders' voices don't fade away. Our community contributions aren't erased and our brilliance is not minimized. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by two powerful voices in this work. Phil Armstrong, who is the former executive director of the Greenwood Rising Black Wall Street History Center in Tulsa. He brings invaluable experience in helping communities reclaim, interpret, and present their own history, especially in the face of attempted erasure. And Akuyea Karen Vargas, a leader, cultural worker, and advocate for preservation and storytelling, reminds us that legacy is not just institutional, it's personal, spiritual, and communal. Together, they'll help us think differently about what preservation really means. It's about action. And we'll share practical, accessible ways every single person here and every single person watching on the stream can begin preserving their legacy right now. You don't need a museum. You don't need a grant. You don't need permission. You can start with a conversation, a recording, a photo, a document, a name, a story, because when we preserve our legacy, we claim our power. When we preserve our legacy, we control our own narrative. And when we preserve our legacy, we leave a roadmap for those who come after us. So tonight, I invite you to listen deeply, reflect honestly, and leave inspired to do the work, your work of preservation. And I welcome you all here tonight to Preserving Your Legacy. Right now, I would like to bring on our special guest all the way from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Mr. Phil Armstrong. Phil.
How you doing tonight?
Excellent to see you, my man. How are you, sir?
Man, really good to see you again. It's been a couple of years, but I'm doing well, and we are still fighting the good fight and representing our history in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Well, I'm not going to go into great detail about our meeting. Let's just say that it was definitely inspiring for me being down in Tulsa. And I got there, I think, about a week before the museum actually opened up. And you welcomed me in. And then I came back and bought a film crew. And just shared incredible information. And then we came back one more time because it was so powerful. And we're going to show a short portion of that documentary film that's being produced that features you and some incredible things that you had to say to us. But I want to at least take a couple minutes before we get started, Phil, because that was a few years ago. And you have advanced and moved on and continued to do the work that you do. And so I want you to just kind of share a little bit before we get into the documentary here about what inspires you and why it's so important for you to do this legacy saving, this preservation of history.
Well, once again, I appreciate the opportunity to stay connected. That's the one thing about the aspect of our history, particularly as African Americans in the turn of 1865 and the incredible history that we're still just scratching the surface on as it relates to historic Black towns. Oklahoma was the birth of what that could be across the United States, and we come to know, as we did not find in our history books, but as we have those who search history and the truth, that there were Black Wall Streets all over the country and in many parts of cities where there were large urban centers, and but none like Greenwood. None has the story that Greenwood had from that period forward up until and even after that destruction. My inspiration came from my mother and my grandfather, who was born in Hazelhurst, Mississippi, and he was the product of a freed Mississippi Choctaw and a freed Mississippi Black resident that produced a bloodline of mixed Black and Indian race. And my grandfather used to teach me and my sister about the gripping realities of growing up in the deep Jim Crow South. He was, because of his bloodline, having what we would call European features, and more colloquially, you know, they used to say you got good hair, and you got a certain look that I think you all are more familiar with. My grandfather, his brother, and his sister was able to go to public school because they could turn over their wrist, and if you were light enough to show a blue vein, you could get public school education. And he was able to obtain that, and that passed on. That history, that narrative passed on down to my mother, who became a natural historian, and passed on. It was her and my father really impressed upon me. And I grew up in a small town called Bidwell, Ohio. Knew nothing of Oklahoma. But as my mom tells it, she was preparing me for a future that she wasn't aware of, but knew that serendipity or God, whatever faith practice that you have, that there was a time and place that I would be called upon to contribute what they planted in me. And that rich history led to me attending a historically Black college and university in Wilberforce, Ohio, called Central State University. And I was a sophomore in 1991, and my college professor did an almost about a semester, and his class really centered around the incredible free lives that Black citizens once lived in the Indian Territory of Oklahoma. And we talked about Greenwood, we talked about all the Black towns and Boley, Oklahoma, and showed us documentaries. So I knew more about Oklahoma than most people. I found out when I moved here in 1997 that I learned more about the history of Oklahoma than most that grew up there and went to public school there. And fast forward, just being in the right place at the right time and being working within the community, had the opportunity to not only serve as the chair of the Greenwood Cultural Center, but become the project director of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. And from 2016 up to 2021, we worked collaboratively with community citizens around the state to bring awareness to that history, so much so that we would raise the money and the funding to build what is you're referring to as the Greenwood Rising Black Wall Street History Center. And it's been a lifelong legacy and a journey. And I stand on the shoulders of those that went before me. And as Maya Angelou said, when you learn, teach, when you get, give. And that's our obligation to the next generation.
Thanks, Phil. We are going to show the documentary. We're excited about this in partnership with the Seattle Griot Project, and then also those funders like For Culture that supported this particular project. We are celebrating Black History Month all month long here at the Columbia City Theater and with Rainier Avenue Radio. Just a little information for you before we get into the documentary. If you weren't here on Saturday, you missed an incredible history of funk production featuring the music of Parliament Funkadelic, and it was just absolutely incredible and a great way to get this started. Tomorrow we'll be featuring a tribute to the late Dr. Quintard Taylor, who was the founder of blackpast.org. Just an incredible story that he started this online. And then when he was doing this, people were thinking online is never going to go anywhere. Anyway, blackpast.org, we'll be paying tribute to Quintard Taylor tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, we'll have Jim Tharp, who is the owner of the Hartsfield Family Enslaved Quilt Collection. So if you're unfamiliar with the history of quilting in the African American community, this is a way to find out relevant and important information about that history. Mr. Tharp and his family have quilts that date back to slavery. And if you're unfamiliar with the quilt codes, you will have information that will let you know that the quilt codes are true. Academia says they were not, but we have proof, and they say that they weren't wrong. Is everybody familiar with the quilt codes? I know if some of you are here and some of you may be listening online. Well, the quilt codes were codes that were used by enslaved people that were put into quilts to let folks who were on the Underground Railroad know this is a safe house, this is not a safe house, go to the river, go to the mountain, someone will be there, and this system was integral. And they also shared information with each other as well about things that were happening in their community, if there was going to be a church service, or just a number of different things. And they did exist, and Mr. Tharp's family, after slavery ended, continued the tradition of quilting. And these codes were put into the quilts. So you're going to see quilts from 1850s, quilts from the 1890s here at this particular exhibit. And then on Thursday, we have a special presentation called Songs of the Forgotten. It's a play that was written by a local playwright, Ibrahim Arsalan, and he will be presenting his play. And then next week, the museum is going to open up. And once again, Call to Conscience will be open for 2 weeks. You'll have the opportunity to see installations and exhibits and artifacts and information on everything from the Seattle Black Panther Party to the history of jazz in Seattle in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. You'll see a brief history of Tacoma. And this year, we are also excited to include a brief history of Kitsap County. You'll see the history of Seattle's religious and faith-based organizations. And I'm not here to debate with anyone about I'm just saying these are the facts that we have. A number of different things you'll see and hear the history of Seattle's iconic NBA All-Star coach player Lenny Wilkins. That will be here as well. Spencer Haywood is going to be joining us. For those of you who remember that name, you're also going to see an iconic collection in this building that we're in right now. The Rainier Cinema was this building in the late 60s and early 70s. This Columbia City Theater was called the Rainier Cinema. It is the place where we could come watch black and kung fu movies, that we call them. You're going to see a collection of vintage movie posters from that time as well. So there are a number of different things that you're going to see here during that period of time at the museum. We invite you to come back. But now, moving forward, I'd like to show you the documentary, and let's get started. And we'll show you that work right now.
So one of the, I guess, most gripping parts of the exhibit is the portion where we call the arc of oppression. The arc meaning people come here with this preconceived notion that one day white people just rose up and just destroyed a community. And from outward appearances, it will seem that way. But we take time to educate and provide the history to let people know, number one, at one point in time, Oklahoma was this free state, that black people were able to live these free, incredible, independent lives where they can basically take life in their own hands and raise their own communities and their own children, their own families, the rise of the ultimately all-black towns. So the backdrop is, how could a place on the Oklahoma Indian Territory that was once a bastion of freedom for Black people to flock to and live their lives in freedom, how did that same place become the home of the most racially horrific violence that ever broke out in U.S. soil? There is a timeline, an arc, where Oklahoma starts going down this racial downward spiral into basically what Black folks left from the South, in a sense, followed them here. Jim Crow, segregation, the racial jealousy, the tensions, 1915, birth of a nation. Oklahoma becomes a breeding ground for those who were affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan and looked and standing downtown Tulsa on the south side of the tracks, looking across the railroad tracks and seeing an entire community of Black people living these wonderful lives in some sense, driving nicer cars, dressing up in suits and ties and their own businesses, completely independent. We don't need you. We have our own economic society and we're doing pretty, in some ways, better than you. It caused racial animosity for those who had the mindset of the Ku Klux Klan, that these people and others like them should be living beneath us. So Oklahoma became a breeding ground for that hate, for that jealousy, for that envy. And there is a timeline from statehood, when Oklahoma becomes a state in 1907. And the first law that they enact as a state is Jim Crow. It's the first law. But up until that point, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, Black folks been living free and enjoying their lives. And all of a sudden, we're a state. And now legally, I can't go certain places. Legally, I can't do certain things. Now, there was separatism and there was separate groups and communities, but it wasn't written as a law. Jim Crow was established in Oklahoma, and here it comes. It just starts building, and that timeline gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to a 1921 where the racial animosity is so fierce, is so heightened that it's, as historians describe, it's like a powder keg of racial animosity. And these two forces, this Black rising power class of economic wealth and independence and leadership and defiance, and this rising undercurrent of hate and racial jealousy towards that is rising, and all it needs is a striking of a match to set them ablaze. Now, that's the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. But that timeline, what was going on in America? What was going on in small town Oklahoma, with the sundown towns of Norman, Oklahoma, and many like that, in Okmulgee, and where in 1911 you have the lynching of Laura Nelson and her son, a mother and a 14-year-old son, all in Oklahoma, all the same place. You've got Greenwood and black towns growing, but you have this fierce resistance and antithesis of that, and that's the Ku Klux Klan. So when we were planning out the arc of oppression, the systems of anti-Blackness, we needed artifacts. And our designer team, local projects out of New York City, we were this is during the middle of the pandemic, so we're having all these Zoom calls. We're trying to design what this room is going to look like. How do we use history to teach that this builds up over time? And you create this atmosphere. So literally the discussion was, I wish we had some artifacts. And I said, well, what kind of artifacts? And they said, oh man, if we had some things from, because we're going to touch on slavery and Jim Crow, if we just had some items from the South or from the Deep South, that era. And I said, well, interesting enough, my mom, she's a historian, and I said she collected all kinds of stuff as I was a kid. I said she probably has a museum of her own if she wanted to. And so they're like, really? You can see the, we're talking about real things. And I said, no. I said, my mom she has Klan robes. She has authentic slave shackles and a ball and chain. She's got documents that are the actual citizenship documentation to get into the Ku Klux Klan. She's got KKK paraphernalia. And they're looking at me like, why would you have that? So I had to explain, my mother, it was, my family, my lineage, it's just, my mother's father, her side of the family, they're from a small southern town called Hazelhurst, Mississippi. Hazelhurst, Mississippi was known as an area where there was the Mississippi Choctaw Indians and freed slaves and blacks. My great-great-grandfather, Elder William Stevens Pleasant, He was the founder and first pastor of a church in Hazelhurst. It was the first church for freed slaves or black slaves, if you will. It was established in 1855. In fact, a couple of years ago, our whole family went down there for Thanksgiving, and I took my sons. They were 18 and 17 at the time, and I was able to take them to that church. We walked out in the cemetery, and there was an old grave marker. We dusted it off, and I said, "This is your lineage." I said, "Look, Elder William Stevens Pleasant." I said, "That's your great, great, great grandfather." He said he was a slave and pastored a church that started in 1855 and then came into freedom, and of course after 1863. And so, when you pass down and look and see what I'm doing, and now, some would call it divine intervention, someone would call it serendipity, but I know that my course and my path and my life, what I'm doing now, was charted long ago. So, honoring that history, my mother took it upon her to be our family historian. I grew up in a small rural town in Ohio, southeastern Ohio, very rural. A lot of white citizens and black citizens in a country, rural environment. And her focus was, I want to raise you, it was me and my sister, I want to raise you as a young black man in Ohio, but in America. Be proud of who you are. I want to teach you how to excel in that world. What many black parents taught their children, there's a term called code switching. You learn how to speak the King's English. You learn how to operate in that realm and be successful, but never forget from whence you've come. Never forget that you are a black man in America. Never forget that history. Never forget what people had to die for so that you could have that right to represent us in a new way in those realms. Never forget. And so she was very adamant about making me, literally making me learn black history in this rural, majority white town, not to use it as a defiant chip on my shoulder, but to maneuver myself so that when I get in certain positions that I never forget my past. I never forget that I'm still a black man in America. And America has a history that was a challenge. Some say, that might say, too light of a word, but just to never forget who you are, son. And so she was very adamant. I was 12 years old and she made me learn the I Have a Dream speech from Martin Luther King. I mean, literally. And I've told the story before to different people, and they're looking at me like, really? Like, my mom made me, turn off the TV, and she said, you can't go outside and play until you learn this speech. I'm like, what speech? I was 12 years old. It was like 1984. And she cut out the speech and the paper was put in the paper. And she said, this is Dr. Martin Luther King. She told me who he was and really explained to him. I'd heard about it, but she gave me the more background. And she said, and today you're going to learn this speech. You can go outside after you learn it. And we spent the entire day standing in a living room, and I have a dream. I have a dream that one day. Now say it again. That was my mother. She put it in me. And of course, at the end of the day, 12 years old, I learned that speech, and I've said it from memory. I'm 51 now, and I can say that, like, wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd say it. But that's the type of mother I had. She would make me watch movies, and then after I watched a movie like Glory, and not just African-American themed movies, Roots and The Color Purple, but she would make me watch classics like Wuthering Heights, classics like The Last of the Mohicans, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It would be of a wide range, but she would make me literally give her a oral report. Now, what did you learn from that movie? What were some of the themes? I'm like, Mom, she said, boy, you hear me talking to you? I'm trying to teach you something. What did you think of that character that did such and such? What did that mean? What did that represent? How does that correlate to American society and the challenges we still have today? That was my mom, and that was just my upbringing. So fast forward to here, I go home and I tell Mom, I said, Mom, we need some artifacts and we need some things that reflects what this room means. And she said, well, go in there and pick out a few things, And we spent an afternoon. I took pictures and put them in a briefcase, brought them here. And when the curatorial team of researchers, they were astonished. Everything was categorized, when she bought it, what it referenced. She even had descriptions of the history of what this represented. And so everything that she donated, they put in. You know, from the Klan robe to the cotton sack to the slave tags and tokens that are in there, to the KKK knives and pins, to their membership into the Ku Klux Klan, even in the Changing Fortunes gallery. You know, we talked about that period in 1960s. She has a sign, an authentic sign from a restaurant in Texas back in the 1940s, and it says "No dogs, Negroes, or Mexicans," in that order. And that's not and then people look at that and they really, but these were things that she collected, and what's here is just half of her collection. But I remember calling her and I said, "Mom, they want to use all your stuff." And so, you know, we wrote a little agreement and she donated it. And she said, "As long as this place is Greenwood Rising during this history, you know, you can, you know, I'm turned over. If it ever stops becoming Greenwood Rising, this comes back to my family," you know. So when she flew here, we dedicated the building June 1st, 2021, as part of the 100th anniversary, the dedication ceremony. And the Centennial Commission decided to fly her here, along with a couple of people, to you know, have something to say and talk about her artifacts. And so that was like on a Tuesday. 2 days before she flew in, she had a picture of the airport, and the first thing she said, "Take me to the museum. I want to see it. I want to see it." And so we walk in. It's just a small group. It's not open yet. And the Arc of Oppression and Systems of Anti-Blackness is halfway through the museum. So I was ahead of her. So I could turn around and watch her reaction. And as she walks in the room, I had the artifacts for about a year. So I think she kind of forgot what she had given me. And so the first thing that her eyes locked in on was the Klan robe, this full Klan robe. And she looked and said, "Hey, that's my Klan robe," you know. And then she stood in the middle of the room and you could see her eyes just locking in and go to each item and each item and each item. And then she responds, and this is responds in a way that only a mother can. She turned, and there was a crowd of people. And she turns around, and she said, "Boy, how much stuff did I give you?" And of course, everybody just laughs, you know. But she just began to, you know, it just emotionally hit her. Things that I was doing to just remember history. I wasn't doing this for anyone to acknowledge. I was doing this for my family. I was doing this to plant things in my son and my daughter about their history. And these things that I was just collecting as a passion ends up becoming part of this historic place so that other people can learn this history. You know, of course, she's shed a lot of tears. And I remember when I got this job and I called her on the phone to tell her, and she said, "That's why I made you do all that stuff. Now you understand. You know, I was preparing you. I was training you. You didn't even know." And but yeah, it's been quite an emotional journey to know what my family lineage is and to be here now and to think that some of the people from Hazelhurst, Mississippi, and Mississippi Choctaw, Native Americans, and Black citizens, maybe they were some of those that in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s came across the Trail of Tears and landed here in Oklahoma because of their, you know, the chattel slavery that the Native tribes practiced in. Maybe some of that came here. You know, one day we'll find out. You know, how did this young boy whose bloodline goes to Choctaw, Mississippi, end up being in Tulsa and being here and living here, been here 25 years and being a part of this history? You know, I'm a man of faith. I believe nothing happens by accident, but you know, that's my story. That's my family history. So it's ingrained in me, but I'm so honored and proud that, you know, that my mother's history, my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather's history all culminates into this place, and that spirit that Black citizens had as free people in Oklahoma.
Do you know, or can you explain where your mother had the inspiration to say, "I'm going to collect"?
Yeah. That's actually an excellent question. I do remember. I'm saying you know, we were not wealthy at all. You know, I know you've heard these stories. We grew up in this rural Ohio, you know, southeastern Ohio, a little town called Bidwell, Ohio, just a small farm town. So my mother and father worked very hard, and they did their best to not let us know that we were poor. and they did an excellent job. I did not know we were poor. We were poor. And so it's not like my mom had money, but she would save that money. And what brought her down this path of collecting things? She used to love to go to flea markets. I think she still does to this day. She's 76 years old. And I could have been no more than 9 or 10. And my mom, every Saturday morning, would get up and go to the flea market, because that's where you can find some bargains, some deals. One man's trash is another man's treasure type of thing. And we were walking, and she had my hand, and I can remember her just stopping. And she didn't move. And I was like, Mom. And I looked up at her, and her eyes were locked in on this item that a white man was selling, a part of his items. And it was a tin can, about this tall, about this round. And it had a black caricature. And the name on the can, it was a chewing tobacco can from the 1930s or the 1940s, and it said nigger hair chewing tobacco. Nigger hair chewing tobacco. And it shocked her that someone would be selling this. She knew about it, but then just to see it, like, oh my gosh, So first I remember she got angry, like, what are you doing with this? Of course, the gentleman said, ma'am, I'm just a collector. I just sell these things. These some people value these things, and I can put it away if you want me to. I can put it away. I'll put it away. And she said, no. It's like, where did you get it? And they began to have this conversation. And he was giving her, these authentic things, as offensive as they are. This was a part of American society, and these things were sold by the companies made millions of dollars on selling blackface and black caricatures in this demeaning way. They made lots of money out of it, and this was an authentic tin can. And she said, well, how much you want for it? Because I want them. And I think at that time it may have been $150. This is back in, gosh, that would be in the early 1980s, so 82, 83. And she said, are you going to be, so it was a Saturday. She said, you're going to be here tomorrow? She said, I'm coming back tomorrow. I'm going to get this from you. He said, okay, I'll hold it for you. So she went home that night and just started researching. Went to the library. We didn't have internet then. So she went to the library, started getting some books on collectibles, African-American black caricature collectibles, and she just started reading. I think she stayed up all night and was reading on all these items, and she found in one of the readings that can, where it was manufactured and the history behind it and what its value was. She went back the next day and bought it. That was her first item, and she couldn't stop. It just fascinated her that at one time in America, this was just like we go and grab a box of Tide to wash our clothes. Everything from that period. If you wanted to sell something, if you were a business, especially in the South, and you wanted to sell something and sell out of it, put a black face on it with nappy hair and use derogatory language to sell your product. And companies, it just became it was a culture. It was a way to sell things in the Deep South. That same can is sitting in my mother's collection. She has a cabinet at home, and it still sits there as that first item she bought. I think the last time she looked it up, I think that same can is like it's probably valued over $2,000 now. But that's what started her. Being shocked, being angry, but then not just being angry, but I want to research this. I want to do more research. And she just kept collecting. I get questions all the time about the clan robe. And we have one. She actually donated two authentic clan robes. The one that the story behind this, and I'll be very brief, but she began to get a reputation in that area for, when you think about it, a black woman that wants to collect anything from the Deep South that as relates to slavery and black history in that regard. And she started collecting enough things where schools started asking her to come and do black history talks, in February at different times. The college that she worked for, she actually started teaching a class. She ended up getting grants from the Ohio Arts Council to take groups on tours through southeastern Ohio where the Underground Road was. So she really got a name for herself being a Black historian, self-taught. Well, the story goes that I believe a gentleman in Tennessee, somewhere in the South, not too far from Ohio, put it like that. He inherited a house from his grandfather. He goes to clean out the house so he can sell the estate. Goes upstairs to the attic. He's cleaning out. There's a trunk. He opens the trunk, and there's all this KKK paraphernalia, Klan robe, all these items. He was horrified. He was angry. He literally wanted to take it outside the backyard and put it in a barrel and just burn it all. And he had the wherewithal to call a friend. He said, man, you don't believe what I found my grandfather's attic. I can't believe he was a part of this Klan robe. And that person he called happened to know my mother and know of her. And he said, man, don't burn that. People want that. That should be in a museum, or that should be the people who want to, take care of this stuff. And he said, you need to call. He said, there's a lady in Ohio, Black woman, that wants this. You got to call her. Somehow he got her number. She gets a phone call, has somebody leaves a message back when they had messages at your house. She gets the message. She calls him back, and he tells her what he had, what he found. He said, I don't know if you want this or not. And she said, where do you live? She said, I'll be there tomorrow. She got in the car, drove, bought the items, had a conversation. But that trip, she talks about it, driving from there back home and knowing what she had in her trunk. She had been wanting to find a Klan robe for years. And my mother actually went with a few people to watch a Klan cross burning that took place not too far from our home. And she stood and watched that, and watching it from a distance, and watched their ceremony and the regalia and burning of the cross. And she never forgot that. And one of her, she said, I really want a Klan robe. I don't want a reproduction. I want a real, authentic Klan robe. And she got two of them. But she's driving home, and it really hits her. I'm sure she got emotional, like what I'm carrying in this trunk. The lives that have been murdered, killed, disrupted, that are affiliated with what I have in this trunk, and what she feels that she was called to do. And she finally found and finally had them. So she gets home. They stayed in the trunk for like 2 or 3 days. She couldn't bring them in the house. She had to prepare herself, pray about it mentally, spiritually. I can't believe what I have, And finally, after 3 days, she went on the trunk and she brought them in the house. She looked at them, and she took care of them. She put them in a plastic garment protector, and she put them in. And she would bring them out, for special presentations when she would show these and talk about. But then she would really take care of them. So for her to donate that and for that to be utilized here, it's like it was meant to be. It was meant to be because it tells the story of the rise. In that same exhibit, we display the membership of the Ku Klux Klan of Tulsa County from 1919 to 1929. No other state in the United States had a significant increase in the membership of the Klan than the state of Oklahoma in that 10-year period. It's almost as if Greenwood and the achievements of Black people in these Black towns, people owning their own land and farmers having incredible wealth because of the oil that's in their land, and they own their land and they're becoming millionaires. It was such a threat to those who felt, they shouldn't have that, that should be for us. So it was almost like a magnet for that hatred, that jealousy. So for it to be in this exhibit to help tell that true story, that American story, that real history, the good, the bad, the ugly of our history, it had to be here because it helps tell the story of just how incredibly hateful and spiteful a segment of the population was that Black people just wanted to live their lives free and independent, and that it cost them their entire community because of it. So we have to have that here. And for me to be in a position to be the project director of the Centennial Commission, and for my own mother to be able to donate these items that tells this story, it's like I was supposed to be here, and I was supposed to do this.
Do you remember any other familial family members that maybe had discussions or that inspires you? And it sounds like your mother was driving force.
Yes, she was a very driving force. And my father, my mother, they're still married today. My father is retired as he pastored 29 years. I'm a PK. He pastored 29 years at Mount Carmel Baptist Church, Reverend Dr. Gene A. Armstrong. And so my father was a very hard worker. My mother was a very passionate historian, but my father was very proud, dignified. I mean, they broke the mold, type when they say they made my father. He was just so hardworking, but so well respected in the community among Blacks and Whites. But he would talk about his struggles of growing up in this small rural town and be a Black man trying to take care of his family, and as progressive as the little town, the area that was where we did all our business and shopping in the growth area. We grew up in Bidwell. I grew up, but the town was called Gallipolis. It's a French city, Gallipolis, Ohio, on the southeastern edge of Ohio. Beautiful, beautiful community, loving people, but it was very segregated, just like many communities were at that time. But he would talk about, he went to college, he comes back home, and the best job, one of the best jobs you could get back then, was working at the power plants. There were two power plants. One was Kyger Creek Power Plant, and they would not hire Black people. Literally, put your application in. Thank you. Of course, they would take it, but they just never get any calls. And I think it was a white gentleman in the town that told my dad, "You need to go out to Kyger Creek, and they're not going to hire me. Go out there." And I don't know all the particulars, but I think somebody made a phone call. I think people started questioning why Black people are not being hired here. And so my dad was one of the first few that they would hire. And he worked his way up and ended up working 38 years there as a master welder. He got to the highest level that a Black man had ever gotten to in Kyger Creek as a master welder, and worked faithfully. But the difficulty of being a Black man in a small town making good money, the things that Black citizens had to think about, I can go out and buy a brand new car, but should I? What's that going to do to, what could that impact be to my wife and my kids? Me driving a brand new car down the streets of Gallipolis, Black family. There are those that see that as a threat. There are those that see that as a, oh, he thinks he's better than us. Oh, he getting up with it, Black citizens, not just my family, Black citizens have to think about that in their lives. Just like here in Oklahoma, the sundown towns, legally, you cannot be in this town if you are Black after dark. What that did for people to have to think about where you were going to travel that day, and what I have to think about, which town do I need to make sure I do not go through because they don't want me there and I got to drive around. I mean, these are things that Black people have to do on a regular basis to survive.
Oh, nation, heal thyself.
I'm going to just start.
All right. Mr. Armstrong, are you still with us?
Yes, I am here.
Let me see. Do we, Mr. Armstrong, are you still with us?
Yes, sir, I am here.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you. That was a few years ago for you to be able to see that again. and thinking about it and reflecting to where we're at right now. What comes to mind for you when I say preserving your legacy? And that was just an amazing example of the dedication that your mother and your family had to understanding the need at that time to preserve your legacy. For you watching this now, and again, you know, you can choose to get into the politics of the moment or not, but where we're at right now, your thoughts on preserving our legacies.
My thoughts now, and I can't help but the timing. Who would have thought that we would be having this presentation and talking about the history of the period, the area that I was commenting on, and Greenwood and the successes of Blacks, and then the culminating rejection or the pushback of that. You know, we realize that history does repeat itself. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said a group of people, sometimes it's referred to as a race of people, but we'll say a group of people that forget their past are destined to repeat it. And some have used the language are doomed to repeat it. Here we are in 2026, and from the highest level of government, not only in this country, but the most powerful political pulpit in the world, puts out the most basic guttural epithet, racial stereotype that goes all the way back to the before Jim Crow, and then all through Jim Crow and ever since then, the portraying of Black citizens, Black Americans, as primates, as apes, as monkeys. And it is incredible to sit back and see how those who either have, well, some that have a perspective of history, and I'm not talking about just white folk, I'm talking about families who are of color that unfortunately did not do what my mother did for me, so that when society begins to reveal its ugly underbelly side, you can say, we've been here before, not where did this come from? And it's not such a shock. It's not such a gasp. It is a understanding that this, yes, as Mr. Gambino in his post George Floyd song, this is America. This is America. And to look at Reconstruction and the freedom of slaves, and within 8 to 10 years after that, the pushback of Black folks being elevated in society, and then here's the pushback, and then move forward into the 20s and 30s and the excellence of that period of Blacks achieving more educationally and arts and in music and climbing up, you know, success ladder. And then here comes the pushback, and we get to this, you know, the civil rights era. Then you have this growth period again, you know, the 70s and the 80s, and then once again you have the rise of, you know, a political class, a middle to upper class, to the point where we have an election of Barack Obama, and boom, you know, the birth of the Tea Party, the pushback. A Black man has become president. We've got to do something. We've got to take our country back again. And so, you know, this constant back and forth cycle. And so when I sit and listen to that, when I think about what Greenwood and so many of our incredible institutions around the country, you know, I'm thinking of the the museum, museum for Dr. Martin Luther King, where he was assassinated in the Lorraine Hotel there in Tennessee, and in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Underground Railroad Museum and Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the list goes on, that are just here to tell this story, that this is a part of what America, and I will want to say that there are some parts and portions of Americans that repeat what's been passed down to them, and the legacy that we as people of color have to teach our children and to pass on and to continue to say these stories must not die. And the reason why, my goodness, look at the past 14 months now of what we've had in seeing the intentionality of trying to erase, trying to put asunder history that we have taken for granted. And I hate to say it, but maybe every now and then we need to have a shock to the system, to think that we've arrived and we don't need these things anymore. If one thing that we're realizing is that we need these institutions, we need these stories of our people and the diaspora of Black Americans and African Americans and their journey and their struggles and triumphs of trying to get America to live out, as Dr. King said, the true meaning of its creed. We need this, and what you're doing, and so many others, we need it now more than ever.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. And I hope you can hang on. Afterwards, we're going to pass on a few ideas to our audience to help them preserve their legacy. But right now, I'd like to bring up our next speaker, who is, again, I had the opportunity to sit down and listen and find out some things that I did not know that I was missing as part of this puzzle of trying to create awareness to African American history in Seattle and the Northwest. And again, Mr. Armstrong, as you were telling, we have to make sure that our history becomes more than peripheral anecdotes that are just talked about. And so I'm not going to waste any more time. I'd like to bring up right now, and preserving your legacy. Please welcome, with a round of applause, Akuyea Karen Vargas.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm more than honored to be able to be here, to be able to share about the history, the heritage, the culture, the journey that my ancestors, as well as many that was enslaved to this nation, they were human trafficked here. They were put in chains here. And much of that history has been buried and erased. And we're hoping and praying an awful lot that these histories are not lost, and these histories can begin to be protected and preserved. And we're more than intentional about that we have to begin to decolonize a system that had colonized and dehumanized people, and that history of harm continues to be perpetuated because of the fear. Whenever there is a fear-based response to telling of true history and human history, we should have our antennas, and there should be a conscious awakening to how do we preserve and protect our history. Our stories are deep. I always start by saying, I come from and enslaved people brought to a land that was stolen. And I say that because the land that we stand on now, we have to understand the history of harm and colonization from those indigenous people whose land we are on even now. So I come from a stolen people brought to a stolen land. I have to start with that to even understand who I am. I was born in Richmond, Virginia, to Lawrence Sowell and Joanna Alfreda Word. I was raised in Richmond and then migrated to Connecticut. Our peoples come from Prince Edward County. They were enslaved there. We can trace our family from many of the plantations. My family has a joke where they say, we are piggies and sows. And I said, how did the piggies and the sows come together? Because you're talking of a pig and a sow. That's what they used to say when they were on the plantations. So when I began to, let me back up a little bit, because I didn't grow up wanting to be a historian or a historical preservationist or even an activist. That didn't come till I came to this Pacific Northwest. That's when things began to transform for me. Like I said, I grew up in Richmond, and it was very segregated in Richmond. I didn't see a white person unless we were on a bus or in the car passing around the bus. But we were on Broad Street in Richmond, Virginia. We grew up there, down next to the Chaco Bottom there, where slaves were imported there. Our family, we lived right down there on Broad Street, and we were told never to go out at a certain time and be aware of the James River. And I always asked my mom, why we can't go down to the James River? She said, because that's where we go missing. And I said, what you mean that's where we go missing? She said, many of our ancestors are at the bottom of the James River. As they imported them in through those slave ships, those that was sick or ill, they dumped them right there in the James River before they were taken off of those slave ships to Chaco Bottom. I grew up there knowing the history of harm that was there with the Confederate armies, with the Klan members, with many of the social ills. And then my dad got a job up in Connecticut. He had a job offered to him in Hartford, Connecticut during some construction, and his brother was working there. And another job came up at UConn, the University of Stores, Connecticut, where he was doing landscaping there. And so my mother told him to take that job. And he said, oh, don't pay that much. She said, yeah, but it's a state job and it will pay later. So you need to stay there. So he stayed there for a little while. But my dad came from farmers that was down in the Carolinas. And so he always was a laborer, soil, construction, doing heavy lifting. And so his conditioning was around a laborer. So he got a job working construction there, and we grew up there. We found out when we migrated there, we were one of 5 Black families in Willimantic, Connecticut, which really shaped us as well, because my brother, even as he was going through school, was really what I would call bullied, racially bullied, because there was this new young Black male, and so he was challenged on every every end. And my mother always told him, you better protect your sisters, and you better not let anybody put their hands on you. So of course he was, labeled as what I would call violent, and so targeted, and also went into the penal system. But these were just some of our experience. And as soon as I could get out of Willimantic, Connecticut, which was the heroin capital of the world, that they labeled Willimantic because of the flood of drugs and alcohol that came through there, I went into the military right away. I went into the military. I was stationed at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And from there, my first duty assignment was in Tongdashong and over in Korea, where I was immersed there in the 2nd Infantry Division there, always in the field and always doing the laborious work. I then, on my return back to the States, received orders to Fort Hood, Texas. And when I got there, they said, you're going to be stationed at Killeen, Texas, right where Fort Hood was. And when I got there, they said to me, you know what Killeen stands for? And I told them, no, I don't know. What does Killeen stand for? And they said, kill each and every nigger within city limits. It was a sundown town. And I said, no, you gotta be kidding me. They said, no, go to the library and begin to research the history of Killeen, Texas. That was my first real immersion in, am I safe here? Are there some things I need to be aware of? And that experience itself, I think, was the one that stuck with me the most. Was I was in the military serving my nation, but yet I was in a community that didn't really want me there. So as I continued my military career, I ended up in Kitsap County. And I say all of that because sometimes you got to get people to see your journey, how you got to where you got, and then why you do the things you do. Like I said, I never started out wanting to even be a historian, preservationist, or doing this research that I've been doing now. It came to me when my husband received orders to Bangor Sub Base. He got those orders, and we were waiting on him to get housing for us to be able to come out here to this Pacific Northwest. He got orders. He said, they offered me some housing. It's on Bainbridge Island, Washington. He said, it's about 30 minutes away from the base. And I said, I don't care, just get it. We ready to come over there and be a family. So we took those orders. When our family got there on Bainbridge Island, I looked around and I said, well, where are the people that look like me? And I began to go throughout the community, to the stores and to the library, to the churches that was on the island, and found out that we were like one of the only black families that was on. There were diverse families there. There was Japanese American, Indo-Pino, Filipino, Native communities. But I said, well, where's the black community? And every time I inquired, they would say to me, oh no, there was never ever any black people that was here. And I said, that cannot be. So I began to do some research. I said, well, where were the farms, because we know when we migrate, we usually migrate, we have farms. And then I said, and if there's military installations here, of course there had to be some African American soldiers, it had to be a trace, or it had to be a footprint of those that were here. And then I came across a document that was in 1855 that reflected that there was a removal and an internment. So the Japanese Americans were not the first interned on Bainbridge Island back in World War II in the 40s. This document indicated that there was a removal and an internment to what is now Suquamish of natives, slaves, and Asians. And that is when my research began, because my inquiry was, well, who were the slaves? I began to pull through documents, go to the Historical Society, found out that one of the oldest grave sites on Bainbridge Island at the Blakely was an African-American gentleman and his daughter back in the early 1800s. And I said, oh, so one of the oldest grave stones in the cemetery was an African-American man. And then I said, what about all the ports that they built here? Port Blakely. What about the Battle Point, Fort Ward, and all the military? So as I begin to pull through the documents, I find all these African-American photographs of those ones that was laboring, that was building the ports, building the mills, building those industry. And then the light bulb kind of went off in my head, and I said, well, if they were building up this area in the early 1800s, and there was a large migration of Confederate military, my question was, in 1855, this document says here that there was a removal and the emancipation, and we had not yet been set free. I said, wait a minute. I said, if there was Confederate presence here in this region, it behooves me to understand that they came here with their property, because slavery had not yet ended. This was early 1800s. So I began to do more of the research. But as I began to go throughout the county, I asked, well, where is the African American community here in Kitsap County, which, many of, and I would say communities of color, calls it Kidnap County. And I asked why, and where were they? So there was a huge migration during World War I, late 1800s, World War I and World War II, of African Americans that came to build the military installations, work in these mills, work in these ports, and be able to build up the area. So then I began to say, well, the majority of these individuals, African Americans, are in Bremerton, Washington. And I said, so I began to look at where they were and found out, well, Ebenezer Church, AME, was the oldest African-American church in the county, over 100 years. There has to be history and footprints of the African-American community and the identities of African-Americans in Kitsap County. Found out there were 5 major churches that was established in Kitsap County. Then I wanted to know where they were all working. The majority of them were working in that shipyard. So I wanted to know what happened there. And then I came across documents from Lillian Walker and Mrs. Greer. And I said, well, who is Miss Lillian Walker and Mrs. Greer? Lillian Walker and Mrs. Greer were secretaries for the NAACP, the Colored Women's Association, the Masonic temples. Their husbands were leaders in the community. And I said, oh my God, and they were mandated from those organizations and from the NAACP during those 30s and 40s to be able to document the contribution, the footprints, the pioneers from this Pacific Northwest region, but not just from Kitsap County, not just from the state of Washington, but they documented over in California, they were in Oregon, they were in Alaska. So they were looking at all of those that migrated to the Pacific Northwest region. And the reason why they did it was because they were networking with African American organizations across the region. It wasn't just, oh, they were just doing about their own hometown or what. No, they were working in a collective, collaborative, unified way, because during that time period, there was much segregation that was going on. And they knew that they had to be helpers of themselves. And they knew they had to help their own communities. They had a thriving community that was Sinclair Park, that we found out that many of those families owned property, they owned land there, and then they decided to run the highway straight through Sinclair Park. Then they put in a plant that was there, and they decided that they wanted to do what they always do, which I always say is either going to be what do you call it? When they say it's going to be a redlining going on, eminent domain, and it's going to be a restrictive covenant that would always be able to come in and disrupt the what I would call thriving African American communities in the building of what they were establishing for their communities. They had their own community centers, they had their own churches, they had their own businesses, they had their own green books, they had where they were networking. And so when I was told there were no African Americans there, I began to say, okay, what we need to do is make sure that we're documenting it, we're preserving it, we're making sure that it is not only documented, but how do we work with our state and with the Secretary of State to be able to get this history in the curriculum and in the history book, because the state of Washington says that in order for anyone to graduate high school, they have to know Washington state history. Well, if we are erased from that footprint and the contributions of that history, then it's as if we never existed. So as we talk about the work of decolonization of the history, the human history that needs to be preserved and protected, and it's not just about African American history, it's about human history. As we begin to make sure that it's documented, it's preserved, and where do we get this history, especially when it has been erased and purged from our systems, which is happening even now from the libraries. You can't talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're relanguaging what can be preserved and what cannot be preserved. So we have to be able to say, how do we move forward in a way that will protect and preserve human history in a way that we can make sure that our family's history, our cultural histories, our human histories are not being erased. I said to my students, I said to them, I said, the bones of our ancestors, where do they lie? I said, the bones of our ancestors, where do they lie? Because they have to be unearthed, they have to be excavated, they have to be researched. Someone said, well, how do you do that? As an urban archaeologist, what would that look like in urban areas? To be able to see where were there once existing communities of color? What were the histories that was there? What changed? What transformed? What, when I say redlining, yes, you know there was a thriving African-American community here, but how were those buildings or how was those communities preserved? So we started working with our legislature to be able to go to Derek Kilmer and ask Derek Kilmer, would he help us to make sure that we're renaming post office, renaming lakes, making sure we're putting heritage markers in, even if they no longer exist in those areas. The footprint and the history and the heritage should always be there. And then how do we teach something that no longer exist in those environments, but yet the footprints and the remnants are still there of those histories? There's much work that needs to be done. And like I said, I didn't go to school for this. Back in 2016, I was encouraged by Dr. Maxine Mims to go back to school. She said, you need to go back to school and get your certificate in genealogy and family history. And I asked her, she said, because if you are serious about preserving your own culture, history, and heritage, you got to know where you come from. You got to know your own family history. You have to be able to trace back as far as you can. Where did you guys originated from? Where did you migrate to? And she said, go back and get that certificate. And then in 2014, when Diane Robinson and Patricia Moncure Thomas and all the committee that was there had worked diligently to protect and preserve the history of Kitsap County African American Historical Society. She had to go back to Pensacola, Washington. She said, Karen, just make sure that this history is not lost. She went to the historical societies in Kitsap County and she asked them, would you please preserve? And they wanted to just cherry pick out of the collection of what was hundreds of years of history and footprints and contributions of African Americans throughout the region. And she said, if you cannot take this entire collection, then you get none. And she put it in a storage. And when she left, she said, just make sure that it doesn't get erased. Make sure that you protect it, preserve it, do whatever you can. And I was like, that is a heavy burden to be able to bear. But I knew that if my ancestors, their contribution, their labor, their hard work wasn't even being acknowledged, valued, or even preserved, then what would happen to our children? They wouldn't even know their own history. So I say all of that to say it was a journey. I never woke up and said I wanted to be this historian or I wanted to be this preservationist or I even wanted that on my shoulders. But I say today I would not be doing anything else but what I'm doing right now. Because if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going, and you can't even begin to teach and support and educate not just your own children, but the globe. Because the contributions that African Americans have contributed to, and those that was enslaved to this nation and have built this nation, and those names that we will never know, and those ones that we will never be able to trace because those remnants are no longer. Some of them lie at the bottom of the oceans. Some of them, we don't even know where their bones lie. Some of those records have been intentionally destroyed. As we began to do this search and began to unearth all of the history, there are pieces of puzzle that each of us have. And Mr. Roger Evans always says a lot of it's up in our basement. A lot of it's up in the attic. It's over here. It's at Auntie's. It's at Uncle Joe's. It's here. It's there. Yes, it is. Because there have been those family historians that knew the importance of preserving their own history, their heritage, and their lineage. And they knew what their ancestors had to do just to survive. And they knew that it was important that their children knew and their children's children knew where they came from. And so as we move forward, we want to make sure that we're doing this collective, collaborative work, because some of my pieces are still back in Richmond. Some of your pieces might be in the Carolinas. Some of your pieces might be in Mississippi and Alabama and over in these regions, because we migrated. We wanted to find a better life. So there was a movement and a migration of where our people went. And of course, when we always got somewhere and we found a better way, we were always calling back to our community and our family members and say, when you want to move out this way, you know where to find me. And we're going to start, and there's some land over here, and there's some opportunities, some jobs and came open over here. And that was how we would stay connected with our communities, with our families, and with those that was migrating, our businesses. We supported one another. So as we move forward to do this work, I always say, what do you envision? How do you envision forward to protect and preserve history and a heritage and a culture and a lineage that have suffered so much erasure? How do we do it? We must do it together. And so I'm so thankful for Mr. Tony. We sat down over in Seattle at the Martin Luther King event that they do every year at the March. And he said, "Oh my God, I've been looking for you." And I looked at him and we just sat down and we chatted it up. But until we start sharing our stories will still remain silent. And many, many, many of our stories have not been yet shared. They have not yet been unearthed because they're still in the soil. So as we begin to do this work with historical preservation, I want to talk about the summit that is coming up in May, on May the 9th at Evergreen. I told you that the history of Kitsap County, when we went and we were trying to find a home for it and no one wanted to support it, it was Dr. Maxine Mims in Evergreen Tacoma campus that said, we will help you to protect and preserve this history. And so we've been working diligently with our students and working diligently to make sure that we're digitizing and cataloging and inventorying and doing that work to be able to make sure that even what I call, these are endangered documents. Some of them are crumbling in our hands. These endangered documents need to be scanned. They need to be digitized. They need to be preserved with care, just like they would if they was over at the pyramids over in Egypt. Our history is that important because our history carries the heart of this nation. I'll say that again. our history carries the heart of this nation for freedom. We talk about freedom. Freedom came on the backs of my ancestors. Freedom came, human rights came, civil rights came on the blood, sweat, tears, and bones of my ancestors. And that's what I really wanted to say. How we need to continue to pay homage to those that came before us.
Wow, I told you. Mr. Armstrong, are you still with us? Daniel, is Mr. Armstrong still with us? Okay, he may not be here. And I want to take some time. Again, thank you for joining us, for preserving your legacy. And it's everyone's legacy is important and should be preserved. I did have a couple questions that I was going to ask. And I also would like to take this opportunity for anyone who has questions to also ask questions. I don't think Mr. Armstrong is here anymore, but Akuyea is still here. And Akuyea, I want to ask you a question. And then again, if anybody has any questions, come on and jump on the mic. And so I'll start with this. What happens, because you were talking about being in Carolina and moving here and moving there, what happens when movements fail to preserve their history?
Movement can be a wonderful thing, but movement can also be a curse, because sometimes we move and we leave behind those things that we need to carry with us. I remember when I was working with Frank Hitamoto on Bainbridge Island with the Japanese internment, and he said to me, we were only allowed to carry what we could carry, and they had to leave all of their possessions, all of their histories. They can only take what they could carry with them. And there was such a loss of rich history and heritage. Some of their farms were sold off. Some of their possessions just totally erased from their lives. So when you ask me how movement can be, have an effect, it can be a good thing if you're carrying all with you. But when it's forced, or you can't take it with you, or you have to leave it behind, one of the things that I say is, even if you can't take it, document it in some kind of way. Make sure that you're keeping a remnant and a footprint of what was.
Okay, another question for you, Akuyea. How does preserving community history support activism and social justice work?
Let me tell you about our community. When I got here in '91, it was a tumultuous time. There was a huge Klan movement on Bainbridge Island, and the Klan was there, and the community came up, and the community began to push back, and there was an outrage, and all the students and communities. That's when the human rights, was on the forefront. When you said, how does this bring you into activism, right?
Mm-hmm. How does How does preserving community history support activism and social justice work?
Yep. So when you see the harms that have already happened within your community, your immediate community, like with the removal of the Japanese, with the internment, when you see the cross burnings that happened in Kitsap County, you saw the Klan movement, social justice, human rights, and there's something that history carries into social activism, that when you are standing for what's right, even in the midst of harm, that's the history. That's the history that a community can carry forward, that they can say, you know what, we're going to stand for what's happening even now, to be able to move our communities into a healthier way of engaging with one another.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you a question here that I was going to ask Mr. Armstrong.
Okay.
But we'll get your take on it. And that question is, in what lessons from Greenwood can communities apply on a smaller local level?
Whether it's Greenwood, whether it's Alabama, whether it's Germany, when you have atrocities that begin to destroy humanity, period. It doesn't matter what race or what color, when you see these atrocities begin to immerse in these ugly, what I would say, remnants of race, hatred, and prejudice, we ourselves, everyone is responsible for how to respond in those times. I think that when we're talking about what's right and how humans treat one another, because it comes down to, how we are treating one another. I believe that we all have that responsibility to be able to respond in a way that supports human life.
All right. Does anyone from the audience have any questions they'd like to ask? That's not going to relieve you of participation, but it's just a way to make it easy if you have any questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask y'all a question, and I'd like to get an answer. What items, this is for everybody individually, this is about preserving your legacy. What items in your family or community could be historical artifacts right now? And so I'd like somebody to tell me about that in your family right now. What could be considered a historical artifact in your family or your community? Anybody? One more time? I didn't hear it.
Grave sites.
Grave sites?
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Somebody else, come on now, y'all, think about it. Preserving your legacy. What are some of the items in your family and your community that could be considered historical artifacts right now? Oh, would you mind coming up here and saying that? Well, I don't have to repeat it because everybody has something that they have. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing your name with us. And then.
Hello, my name is Osceola Lee. My great-grandmother has 2 published poetry books, and my grandmother had one of the first Black-owned beauty supplies in Bremerton, in Manette, Bremerton. Thank you.
Anybody else who has items in your home that you're thinking about, or maybe that you're not thinking about, but wait a minute, these could be things that could preserve our family legacy? Somebody come up here. Don't be bad. Okay, come on up. Come on. I bet you do have an item, or you have something. And again, thank you to everyone who's watching us online right now as well. And I'm sure you have some thoughts about it, but we have some folks here in the audience. And essentially, this is just an exercise just for folks to see how easy it is to preserve your history. Go ahead, tell us your name and then.
My name is Dee Dee Evans, and Roger is my husband, and this has gotten me interested in figuring out where I come from. My father's side of the family is from Virginia, and from Kenbridge. Yeah, Kenbridge, Virginia. And anyway, they have a family reunion back there. And I found out that they have a picture of a great-great-great-grandfather of ours that was a slave, and I had never, and his wife, and I had never seen a picture of it before. So that was really interesting to me to see my family heritage like that.
Preservation is not just for museums. It starts at home, and everyday items and stories are historical records. So it might be photos that you're not even thinking about right now, that are things that can be preserved. It might be a style of comb that you're using. Definitely stories. And then you have tools now. We have these cell phones where you can record your elders and others, and then make that a permanent record that you get to keep. For Black communities in particular, preservation is especially urgent. Too often our stories have been erased, distorted, or excluded from official records. When we preserve our own history, we preserve and we protect and we identify our cultural continuity and ensure that our stories are told in our own voices. Was there anybody else out there that wanted to share something from your home or your community? I can't believe y'all are being that bashful right now, because I want to get these folks who are also watching online and in here to feel comfortable saying, you know what? This is we're living in history right now.
Well, we have Miss Shalee that is here, who is one of the trustees of one of the oldest African-American churches in Kitsap County. I would like Shalee to say the importance of that, to speak about the importance of preserving the only and oldest African-American church in the entire county in Kitsap.
Okay, come on up. See, everybody's a little bashful about being on the microphone. But it's okay. Feel comfortable, feel welcome, and understand that you are providing information to folks so that we can take action. And start off by saying your name.
My name is Shalee Lee, and I'm grateful to Sister Vargas for actually everything that she has been doing. It's just, we're thankful for that. To the fact that our history of the church will be celebrating 114 years this year in November. And we just thank God for the lineage and everything that everyone has done. We just need to continue to do the work, making sure that the history is not forgotten. We're a small and very small church, the oldest but very small church. And so we just need to make sure that our history is continuing on every day as much as we can, and to make sure that our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren that we have now is actually continuing on with that history. It's just a blessing, and we continue to do the work of the community. We must be involved in our community, and we still thrive on that. So we thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for everyone who's attending here live at the Columbia City Theater. Again, this is Preserving Your Legacy. I'd like to thank our guests, and please give him a round of applause, even though he's not with us right now. Mr. Phil Armstrong from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that incredible story. And still here with us, Miss Akuyea Akuyea Karen Vargas, please, an amazing round of applause. Thank you so much. And I also want to say a big shout out to Mr. Roger Evans and the Seattle Griot Project. I went down to Tulsa, and I was in Wichita. Like I said, I was going to drive up to Tulsa to see. And I drove up to Tulsa, and I found out that even though the Greenwood Rising Museum hadn't opened yet and they let me in, that Tulsa was still, even though the centennial, was happening and all these other things were happening, the folks who were from that community were still bearing the weight of what had happened to them. And I got back here and I said, talked to a few people. Roger was one of them, and I said, you got to come down to Tulsa with me and bring a camera so that we can film some of the stories of these folks while they're still here. And I know that impacted Roger the same way that it impacted me. And then we went back again. Just an amazing opportunity, and really the beginning for me of that voyage, even though I was always very engaged and involved with Black History Month. Not knowing the history of African Americans in Seattle and not being able to find it readily is the reason why this call to conscience was created. And so for the last 3 years, we have archived, documented, but mostly brought forward information about Seattle's African American history, because you can't find it anywhere. If you went down to King County Archives to find out where we were, we don't exist. And so it is important. Tonight is not, the beginning of the end of this conversation. Like I said before, preserving your legacy doesn't require a grant. It doesn't require a museum. It starts with asking questions. It starts with listening to elders. It starts with saving photographs, writing down names, recording stories, recognizing that everyday moments matter. What we preserve becomes what is remembered. What is remembered becomes what is valued, and what is valued shapes the future. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for joining us on the stream. And we will again be here tomorrow. We'll be paying tribute and honor to Dr. Quintard Taylor. And then the next day after that, we'll be talking to Mr. Jim Tharp, who'll be sharing information about the Hartsfield Enslaved Quilt Collection. This is just amazing stories about this. If you don't know, you really need to be here for that. And then Songs of the Forgotten is an original play written by Arslan Ibrahim. He'll be here and they'll be performing that. And then the following, starting on Saturday, the 14th, the museum will open up. So now when I tell you, we have the history of Tacoma. Things you don't know, we have the history of Kitsap County. Things you don't know, we have the history of the Seattle Black Panther Party. If you don't know, you really need to know. We have history of every Black African-American elected official in the history of King County. Every one. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm so proud of it when I was showing it to someone, and someone said, and they were white, and they said, wow, not very many. And I'm thinking, whoa, there's a bunch, But it just depends on perspective, yes. And if you're looking at it from that perspective, no, there haven't been very many at all. But we have every one that you can find, and you'll see their bio, and this will be open for the last 2 weeks. Again, we're also going to have a celebration of remembrance for Seattle icon Lenny Wilkins, and Spencer Haywood and James Donaldson will be joining us to host that. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for caring. This is the 100th anniversary of Black History Month. It should be, it deserves a round of applause. It should be more prominent than that. We should all be saying, happy 100th anniversary of Black History Month. It is divided into two segments. In 1926, Carter G. Woodson started what was initially known as Negro History Week. So in 1976, it became Black History Month. So it's actually 50 years of Negro History Week, 50 years of Black History Month, which is 100. So this is the 100th anniversary of celebrating Black history. All right. Thank you all for being here. I hope you join us again for the rest of this month. We have some incredible installations and exhibits to show you. We're going to have more speakers. Actually, Elmer Dixon from the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party will be here on the 21st of February doing a book signing and sharing information with you. And it ain't over. If we can add stuff, we're going to add stuff. We'll continue to let this grow because we have the entire month. A month is not enough, but we definitely ain't trying to stop at a day. So again, my name is Tony Benton. Thank you all for being here. And I hope I see you all who are watching us on the stream from everywhere down here at the Columbia City Theater. And I hope I see those of you who are here in the building with us tonight again the rest of this month. Thank you.